Let's give a big round of applause to Abhishek Jain, Director, Green Economy and Impact Innovations, Council on Energy, Environment and Water. Kaushal Bisht, Director, Partnerships and Strategic Alliances, Varaha. I would also like to invite Bhaskar Tripathi, Senior Manager, Climate Trends, to moderate the session. Let's hear it for our next panel, everyone.
So many interesting conversations the entire day today. Some were technical, so many of you might not have been able to relate to them, but they were explained really nicely. But this one conversation especially sort of drives the point home, particularly to our food plates, the thalis that we eat every night, every day. The conversation of sustainable food and how do we make our agriculture practices smart and resilient and prepare them for the impacts of climate change that we see every day. We produce food for 1.4 billion people in this country, and not for just for our country, but many parts of the world as well. Agriculture remains a central pillar not only of our economy, but our culture as well. But climate change is directly threatening this system, which needs to be addressed, which needs to be understood. And there are so many facets to this conversation, but I think we will only focus on one, which is solutions. How do we, going forward, ensure that the food we grow is grown sustainably, it's not producing greenhouse gases that ultimately cause climate change, but at the same time we are able to scale the production to meet our needs. Let me just give you some broad facts, which essentially are tip of the iceberg, but they're important that we hear them. In 2022, extreme heat reduced wheat production by around 3 million metric tons, prompting the government of India to restrict export to safeguard domestic food security. Climate-related losses are becoming more frequent and severe. We heard Sunita Narayan earlier saying that every other day in this country we are experiencing a climate impact. And that is causing 9.47 million hectares of farmland to be affected by these impacts. Currently, the threat of Super El Nino, the strongest in 150 years, is looming large on our kharif production. More recently, a rainfall deficit of over 40% in June contributed to a 23% decline in kharif, which is our monsoon crop sowing, compared to the 2025 levels. So how do we, again, just the tip of the iceberg, the risks are many. How do we make sure that we prepare our vast farmlands for this threat which is here? A few years ago, we were talking about projections that wheat can be impacted, rice can be impacted, but today we are talking about how do we save them, because they are getting impacted. So I'm thankful that joining me here are very knowledgeable experts. I will pose some questions to them, and hopefully they will be able to break this conversation down for us in simpler manner and make us understand the seriousness of this issue and how do we move forward. I think I'll start with first question that I will pose to both of you, and then we will come to the next round of questions. First one is, what are the most critical bottlenecks preventing farmers from adapting to climate-smart agriculture practices at scale today? And how do we move forward? What are the main, a couple of major challenges that you see? Abhishek, you can start.
Thanks. I think when it comes to climate-smart agriculture practices, let's just break it down. A lot of those are actually practices on the farm that if you change the way you are doing a particular process in cultivation, let's say the way you're doing flood irrigation, whether you're flooding your farm or are you doing it as wet and dry methods, are you doing it as sprinkler or drip irrigation, will significantly change how much methane emission you are emitting from the farm, right? Now, this is a behavior change that needs to happen at the farm level. And we're talking about 120 million farmers in this country, 12 crore, right? So that is one big area where you need to actually build capacity, build awareness about the practices. Then you talk about regenerative agriculture, what kind of biological inputs you can put back into the soil, back into the farm, instead of urea or DAP. All of those need capacity building, knowledge dissemination at each and every farm level. Now that is one of the biggest challenge in terms of actually scaling climate smart agriculture or regenerative agriculture. The next is wherever you are bringing in any technological intervention. Let's say you can do solar powered irrigation pumps that will reduce the use of diesel in the farm. That technological interventions typically will get constrained by the actual financing and the upfront capital that the farmers will be able to incur for something like that. We know like small and marginal land holdings are 85% of our holdings in the country, right? Farmers are not sitting on capital to buy a solar pump off the shelf. Even with government subsidies, it is not easy for most farmers to actually adopt something like this. And a farmer will not do it, because it is the diesel is causing climate change. The farmer will do it because the diesel cost is becoming exorbitant for me to continue doing my irrigation. Right? So it has to be very clear that when we are pitching for these climate smart practices to the farmers, what's in it for them for this season, for this cycle of income. If you'll say, oh, this is good for the planet, please do it, it's not going to happen. None of us do it, and farmers are taking the most amount of risk compared to any other entrepreneur out there. So yeah, so those I would classify as the big risk: knowledge and financing and the capital needed.
Yeah, sure. So agriculture and allied sectors, basically they contribute around 15% of total emissions which we do as a nation, right? And if you see, how does it happen? Just as Abhishek said, flooding causes the methane bacteria to act and break down the soil organic carbon into methane. And then we use irrational amount of urea, DAP solutions to farms because of, I should say subsidized pricing to farmers, and the erratic use basically results in a lot of nitrous oxide emissions, which are 300 times more potent than CO2 gas. So the bottlenecks are basically, for example, agriculture residue burning, right? So one principle is like you can convert this into compost, vermicompost, or even do a process called pyrolysis gasification to convert into biochar, which is a very good soil amendment tool and a very permanent durable carbon which can store in the soil itself. But it has to compete with the pricings you have to, basically you have to compete with urea DAP, which is heavily subsidized. Then the second problem is like the government through its entire machinery over the last 30, 40 years has been pushing transplanted rice, saying developing nurseries and doing transplanted rice is like really good for productivity yields, which is correct as well. But then new age technologies like direct seeded rice, alternate wetting and drying, all these techniques which can reduce a lot of these methane emissions, basically they do not get the proportionate share of promotion like from the governments, and the infrastructure requirements to follow the machines, availability, and then the farmers are, the behavior change do not happen in it doesn't happen in a year, right? So you need time for such behaviors to get adopted. For example, in transplanted rice, when you fill water, then apart from rice, there is nothing else. So weeds do not come out. But then suddenly to reduce the methane emissions coming from paddy farms, if you transition down into, let's say, a direct seeded rice mechanism, there are other weeds coming out. So the farmers are not well equipped right now to handle this weed, which basically gives them a shock in terms of yield decrease. And a behavior which is good, then basically gets always, for that particular farmer who experienced a bad yield from that particular farm, will go away. So, the solution for this, we have multiple solutions which we can discuss, but the idea is like the general machine, the government machinery which is there, right? They also need to come on the same part to talk about such climate resilient practices on the ground, and we can again transfer. All of this happened because of the green revolution pressure which we had, and now we need to transition back to smart ways of doing agriculture, which will reduce these farm emissions in the farms.
Just to focus on the points you both mentioned here, one was about information and finance, and the other one was about practices. And I understand, Kaushal, in the carbon market space, it's supposed to be a system that can not only help farmer understand new practices, but get them money and the financing from the carbon markets to change their practices for the long run. Can you elaborate on that? Can you just simply first, maybe explain the flow of how a small farmer, which are small and marginal farmer, which form most of our farmers in terms of their numbers, can benefit from a carbon market? How do you explain it to them, and how do you think it can change their practices in a sustainable way?
Okay, sure. So we have a project across Punjab, Haryana, wherein we work with farmers to transition them into climate resilient practices. What we do is we onboard them into our platform. So their land records, the ownership of carbon basically gets associated with the land rights of the particular farm where we are doing this. So we need to do geofencing, KML, polygon shape files for all these farms. And then we basically promote or give incentives to these farmers to transition into climate resilient practices. For example, for direct seeded rice, you need a seed drill, which is like specifically designed, which you can use to do direct seeding. So if this seed drill is not there, the farmer can't adopt it, right? So we basically bring this machine to a FPO, a farmer producer organization, and then in the neighborhood village, this one particular machine can do around 250 acres of direct seeded rice in a year. Then you also have to handhold them to basically take care of the weed problem, which will crop up, right? How to handle it, how to suitably select these seed quality, which will be more resilient towards direct seeded rice as a practice. So in this project of ours in Punjab, Haryana, we follow 3 practice changes. One is direct seeded rice. One is the residue incorporation of, instead of burning, you basically use a super seeder to put it back into soil, like incorporate it. And then the third practice which we do is zero tilling. So along with putting it back to soil, the super seeder machine also put back the wheat seed to the soil, and we do not till it. So when we do not till it much, we do not disturb the soil. So a lot of microbial ecosystem in the soils get conserved, which basically fixes nitrogen and also avoids nitrogen leaking from soil, which basically forms nitrous oxide emissions into the atmosphere. All of this basically then using technology gets validated and verified. So by validation, I mean we can, through satellite imagery itself, we can differentiate between a farm, whether this particular farm has done direct seeded rice or transplanted rice, because the patterns are very different, right? The image signature is very different. And then once this is validated, then we basically using biogeochemical models, we quantify the delta increase in soil organic carbon and the decrease in nitrous oxide emissions and methane emissions coming out from these farms. This is then submitted to a registry, for example, Varaha Gold Standard. They appoint a third-party auditor. This auditor basically audits the project. Random samples are collected. And the model is tested whether the calibrated model is giving out real results or not. Once that is established, then the registries issue carbon credits. For this particular first project, we issued 400,000 tons of CO2 equivalent claims, which we are right now selling in the market. And this money, majority of this money will flow back to the farmers. So when they have an incentive coming in for doing a good thing, a good practice, which is also giving them savings in labor as well as increase in their productivity yields, they are bound to do this again and again over years, which will enhance the soil organic carbon content and convert the entire farms to more sustainable ways of doing farming.
Understood. Abhishek, I would want to ask you a similar question on the kind of work that you've already been doing. Through initiatives like Powering Livelihoods, you have worked extensively on green energy solutions on India, distributed renewable energy solutions also. How can these renewable energy technologies help make agriculture more resilient, and how can it help farmers realize more sources of additional income?
Yeah, so the kind of solutions you're talking about, just for all of us to imagine, think of things like a small solar-powered dryer, which can dry from tomatoes to flowers to pineapples and whatnot, to make it a dried commodity, right? From grapes to raisins and so on. We are talking about solutions like a solar-powered hydroponics station, which can grow fodder at your home. If you are keeping dairy animals, the fresh green fodder for your animals. We're talking about solutions like solar-powered flickering lights, which will keep the wildlife away from your farm, and the farm will not get damaged by the wildlife encroachments. And many such. We have supported some 25 odd such solutions. Now, each of these are meant to solve very specific problems, which will either reduce the cost of agriculture. Let's say, as we talked about, moving from pump is one example, but similarly sprayers. Like a lot of people use diesel or petrol pump sprayers to spray pesticide, fertilizer into the farms. Moving that from diesel pumps to solar again reduces the cost of running that. season to season. So cost reduction is one pathway through which many of these solutions are improving income, reducing the input cost. The second is where you are able to create new venues of income. That tomato grower otherwise was forced to sell tomatoes at 2 rupees a kg when there is a glut in the market, now has an alternative that, okay, I can dry it into a dried tomato, which can be sold at 300, 400 rupees a kg, which goes on your pizza toppings, right, as dried tomato. So there are alternative venues to now create a bargaining power with the farmer also, कि अच्छा किस price पे मुझे बेचना है market में. Right, so that I think, and then many such solutions which can add value. We have created solutions in the form of value addition for horticulture processing. So same machine, one single machine can process 100 different horticulture produces, from making gajar ka halwa to extracting tulsi ka ark in one single machine, which has been deployed across women self-help groups in the country to enhance their incomes. So we have directly ourselves enabled through our program the last 4-5 years about 42,000 livelihoods across the country. But these solutions have now scaled up to a few lakhs. So these are no more like isolated pilot examples here and there. These are actually commercially viable solutions being deployed on the ground with paybacks anywhere between, in most lucrative cases, from 6 months to 3 to 4 years.
Just a follow-up question. I've seen how actually these distributed technologies do create impact on the ground and add to farmers' income. But I've also noticed a couple of challenges with that. One was that farmers sustaining these practices for a long time, that seems to be becoming a challenge. After a few years or a few months, they seem to be moving on to new technologies or just trying to experiment with something different. That was one. Second was that some of these technologies can be costly for a single farmer. So either the farmer can afford it or they can form a group and together afford these technologies. So on part of the longevity of these processes, how do you see that as a challenge, and do you think that with certain market linkages becoming more common, this can be solved? Because market not being available is also a major challenge.
Yeah, no, very important points. I think first is like, do not throw technology just because you have technology, don't throw it in every context. Just be very clear in which context, what would make actual sense for the farmer. I'll give you an example. Look at horticulture produce, any fruits and vegetables. Now, the most costly solution that you can throw, which is also green, is a solar cold storage. It will cost anywhere between a 5 lakh to 15 lakh, depending on the size. Now, that's a very costly solution if you're going to store, let's say, onions in it. But if you were storing strawberries in it or storing lemons in it, which have a huge market arbitrage between seasons, maybe it will become viable. But if you're only storing something for a week, it is again a pretty bad solution. It's a very over-designed, over-expensive solution. You only need actually just maybe moisture-based latent cooling, which can keep the produce fresh for another 7 months, 7 days or 8 days. And we have solutions for that, which is a solution which costs you 14,000 rupees. Right? So if you do not actually put the right solution in the right context, you would create a lot of unviable solutions, which will not then get used, especially if they are deployed via subsidy. The other thing we've seen is, like, if you are completely giving a solution on full subsidy, there is no actual interest by the user to keep them running, to actually engage with them and so on, because wo kisi government program mein mil gaya. The other thing that we see is, like, genuinely maintaining these solutions on the ground, especially from a technology perspective, can be challenging. Think of the company who has produced the solution or manufactured it. If they are deploying one cold storage in one village, another cold storage in 50 kilometers away in another village, another cold storage 100 kilometers away in another village, it's hard to do after-sales service if you have a technological breakdown and so on. So what we are trying to now do is, by bringing a lot of these manufacturers together, to say, can we create common service network? Because each one of you cannot afford to create a service network, but if 15 of you are coming together across different technologies, it makes it viable to have a technician at a local level and so on. So those are the ways in which we are trying to make this work.
Just to add a point here, right? So how we look at it is, like, we need to start paying for ecosystem services, right? I mean, the reason why a farmer do not use a super seeder to incorporate soil biomass back to soil, because it will cost him money. and no buyer is ready to pay for this right now, right? So, but then the farmer basically takes out a matchstick and then burn the biomass. The idea here is if the ecosystem basically starts to pay or basically take this as a cost of doing business, and which is happening through carbon markets, the net zero pledges which all these large companies have, the insetting projects which they have, they are mandated to do. I mean, a lot of these companies have their own voluntary targets to become net zero at some point of time, starting from 2030 to 2050. Governments coming together and then basically agreeing to a net zero pathway in future. A lot of money is flowing to this. Over last 4 years of our existence at Varaha, we basically have channeled out $100 million plus in total equity plus project finance capital towards such projects. And in this scenario, the farmers are basically for doing right practices at the farm, which basically reduces the intensity of emissions from production of food, or let's say production of even fashion, right? In cotton value chain, there are a lot of developments, a lot of efforts which you can do, which can make it basically net zero as well, and release the pressure in the entirety of supply chain, be it food, be it fashion. That is possible. At smaller scales currently, but with more and more demand coming in, a lot of companies having very aggressive targets to become net zero, hopefully will reach that stage when we will start paying farmers for doing this.
Yeah. Kaushal, a question to you I wanted to ask specifically about carbon markets was this, that the verification process and making sure the methodology is correct, all of this takes a long time. Onboarding farmers, working with them, convincing them to try a new agriculture practice, and then expecting these farmers to stay on with you for a few years. It can sometimes take 3 to 4 years for these agriculture credits to be registered on the carbon markets, voluntary markets, and then the money to come in. How do you keep engaging with the farmer in this time, in this period, and how do you convince them that even though that there might be some delay in the money coming in, because we understand that process, but this is the right thing to do?
Yeah. So see, you have to show him something upfront as well. So you can't expect a farmer to do certain practices for 3-4 years and then say, oh, you'll get money 3-4 years later. Nobody will be onboarded, right? For example, for biochar, we started collecting biomass, paying for it, entirety of it. We collected around 400,000 tons of biomass in cotton wood after harvest, which was entirely getting burnt in Maharashtra, let's say conclaves in Andhra, Telangana. So, I mean, we started paying for it from our own pockets, collecting it, converting this into a 1,000 years durable carbon form called biochar, which basically then goes back to farmers free of cost. So we do not charge them anything. So when you give them something which holds moisture, which holds nutrients in their farms, enhances their productivity yields, also pays them in some way in terms of getting, a market for their biomass, which was no value at all. And then, a possibility of a future revenue too, right? It looks all very promising. It's not that. It's very, very tedious and ops heavy on the ground. But, you have to see, show farmers that even on day zero, they are getting something out of it, right? Once you show a farmer that there is economic outcome from it, you do not have to, again, ask him to follow this practice. So if he sees that this is good for his soils, good for his productivity, he will continue doing it. Having said that, that needs catalytic capital, right, which also needs to be patient in nature. A lot of capital is not that. So a lot of philanthropic, CSR, government fundings, hopefully a lot of VC capital, PE capital can also come in and basically speed it up. We are seeing a lot of buyers interested in buying outcomes, right? And they do not want to go into the uncertainties of whether a project will get validated, verified, and issuing outcomes or not. So they give you offtake contracts, but they give you offtake contracts saying that when you issue these, then we will pay you money, right? Then you have to cause this on the ground. So for that, we were very fortunate enough that we were able to raise a lot of equity capital to make it happen on the ground. The idea is like, given our success and few of our counterparts who are basically getting successful in this, we really hope a lot of more money a lot of catalytic capital can come in and can help transition out a lot of our not so very climate smart practices on the ground.
On the funding question, I actually have a question for both of you, and this sort of comes from my personal understanding of these systems, and I wanted to always speak to an expert to ask this. A lot of the money that is coming in today, the funders specifically, as you both pointed out, are funding solutions, outcomes, and those outcomes would be the number of tools distributed or number of practices changed. But less and less of it is focusing on changing the systems behind the basic core systems that then lead to these outcomes. So this, when in a world where the objective of funding are changing, how do you think that these important practices which need to be changed can then attract money and reach millions of farmers? That is the requirement of the day.
Yeah, no, you're right. Like, especially if you look at domestic money coming into these areas, right? Like, agriculture is almost like 4th or 5th largest CSR spend in this country, because it is linked to rural livelihoods and so on. A lot of it goes into those kind of artifact outcomes, or outputs rather, which is how many farmers got trained, how many technologies got distributed, and so on. And not necessarily the actual outcomes in terms of the income change impact, but also are these sustainable system change level impacts and so on. I think there is a journey for Indian domestic funders and philanthropy to still travel where they start focusing on not just the immediate outcomes, but also the underlying systems that need to be changed. We are seeing this happening a lot more with some of the international philanthropy, because I think they have done it many times over to now burn their hands enough to say, where do we need to actually bring in support for long-term sustained change? And they are trying to build robust sectors. They are looking at this from all angles that, okay, if a system need to be sustainable in the long run, whether it is climate smart agriculture practices, you need to get enterprises viable who are working with the farmers. If you keep doing it with one civil society or one NGO at a time, NGO doesn't have a stake in it the moment the project is over. But if it is an enterprise who is working with the farmers, they have a stake in it because they need to become viable themselves. So a lot of agri entrepreneurs who are now taking up climate smart practices are coming into the picture. The other way they are trying to do this is ensuring that, yes, the policy is getting aligned vis-a-vis the changes that need to happen. The third thing is that the finance and capital is getting stacked to this. So unless you pluck each of this area simultaneously and interconnected, it's not going to be viable. And we are seeing philanthropies becoming open to it, especially international ones, but it still need to travel to Indian philanthropy.
Yeah, so I have a very optimistic view about this. I think even somebody ready to give you a binding contract on outcome is like really good process, right? You just have to establish some success cases and you have to make these projects bankable. The moment they become bankable, I mean, see, somebody is there. For example, a Microsoft or Google is there to buy your outcomes at a certain price point which is already fixed. And you have your economics established through a project which a bank can have a look at. You can raise money, right? Bank is like the easiest or the safest form, but maybe some high risk taking capacity donors or loan givers can also come in and do this. What we are looking at for sustainable practices in agriculture, be it biochar, enhanced rock weathering, sustainable agriculture, even tree planting, right, agroforestry and all of these solutions. We really see, we are seeing initial start of becoming bankable in nature. For example, our distributed biochar production machines, they basically, with the carbon revenue and the revenue which they generate from biochar sales and soil amendment, and both of these combined are really, really profitable. So these small FPOs can basically access agriculture infrastructure fund or maybe even through an NBFC or a bank and take small loans, and through climate finance mechanisms, they can start making money. To answer the other question which you said, all the projects take 3-4 years. It's not true. With new tech-led registries coming in like Isometric, Puro.Earth, all of these registries, basically they have a lot of scope for incorporating tech for validation verification, which basically brings down the entire process for the first issuance to 6 months, and then the following issuances to every 2 months, even 3 months, which basically reduces a lot of pressure in terms of working capital for such projects to go ahead. That's why I said, I have a very optimistic view that this is happening already.
Well, on that positive note, I think I'd like to bring the conversation to a close. There are many, again, as I said, many facets to this conversation, and we can keep having them. It's important that we address this issue, and India has many problems coming from the climate impacts, but at the same time, as we've sort of spoken about, there are many solutions also that are being experimented with, and some of these will scale and solve the real issues on the ground. And we can just hope that that happens very soon in the years to come, because we all know that our farmers need that support, and that change needs to happen now. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us in this conversation, and thank you, gentlemen, for your views. This was a lovely conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Bhaskar, for the very insightful conversation that we have had. Thank you very much to the panelists as well for putting